author. Tonight is September 5th, 2018, and this is Amelia Vogler. I'm the Executive Director of the Healing Touch Professional Association, and I have with me a very special individual that I'd like to introduce before we get started. I'd like to introduce Sky Nelson Isaacs, and I'd like to read his bio. Being stuck or frustrated is an important part of the human experience. And we all have times in our life when we feel confident and empowered. Sky seeks an understanding of the true nature of our empowerment and looks from a physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and an interpersonal point of view. In each experience, Sky asks himself the difficult question, what am I here to learn? And from that path of inquiry, he's embarked on an investigation into the physical nature of our spiritual selves. He believes strongly in the power of physics, yet since his first years growing up around Sri Swami Satchidananda, he has also spent decades learning about his inner self. His work seeks to bring these worlds together, to find a language both linguistic and mathematical, which allows us to bridge the gap that exists within each person, linking the logical and the intuitive. Sky finds wholeness through his practice as a professional songwriter and a musical performer, a research scientist studying the foundations of quantum mechanics, a presenter on synchronicity and flow, and the author of the forthcoming book, Living in Flow, The Science of Synchronicity and How Your Choices Shape Your World. Sky is also one of those individuals that you hear speak one time, and you quickly realize that you are listening to someone who is deeply important, and someone who, regardless of the topic, is speaking from the deepest and most compassionate place of his heart. I met Sky at IONS last year, and I heard him speak he asked a very provocative question at one of the introductory panels with Matthew Fox. And in that moment, I saw him standing in front of a microphone, and I did what all executive directors do. I channeled my inner conference ninja, and I waited, and I stalked him, and I walked around, and I waited for that perfect time when he didn't have a crowd of people around him, and I swooped in, and I got his digits, and then I waited again until Spirit said, okay, Amelia, now, contact him now. And what I find so resonant about Sky's work is that he deepens our understanding of understanding how important we are, how each of us on this call and each of our clients is important beyond measure, both theoretically and scientifically. And I think that the reason why I brought Sky here is because I believe that this understanding can inform us as practitioners, because we can use his new paradigm of scientific thought and extend it to our clients, giving us a new way of channeling a language of supporting our clients and understanding why they are important beyond measure, and helping them to explore the tree of possibilities that are out there that can help them get unstuck and moving towards better physical health, emotional wellness, mental clarity, and spiritual connectedness, and also interpersonal confidence and joy. Sky and I have been working together for almost 9 months, off and on, and I think what time created for us was the perfect moment. With his book finalized and his new recent amazing winning of his regional songwriting competition, his voice is clearly being asked to be heard. And Sky, I'm so honored to have you on our Healing Touch Professional Association Energy Medicine in the Spotlight.
I'm so grateful to be here, Amelia. Thank you for inviting me on here and bringing this wonderful group of people together. It's wonderful to see all of you in there from Delaware and Denver, Wisconsin, Alaska, from near my hometown, Alameda. Hi, Lori. I'm in El Cerrito, California, which is pretty near Berkeley. And it's just lovely to be here. I'm so grateful to be part of this community, be brought into this community. And I look forward to sharing the research I've done and some of the stories that I have about the research, And I trust and hope that it will be meaningful to you and find a home in you as well. So shall we start?
I think that sounds great.
Great. I'm going to share my PowerPoint. So here we are. Let's take a moment to center ourselves. I'm working with this place inside of myself that when I'm by myself, I notice all that's happening in me very well, very clearly. I can feel who I am very clearly. And then when I connect with others, there's this new space that opens up. There's a connection that opens up. And then the question for me is, how do I bring that same self who is there inside, who is authentic, who is whole, who is honest and genuine, and bring that same self into the space between us so that we can share authentically. And it's a new space, the space that we're creating here in between all of us here. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to bring myself into that space. And we're going to talk today about synchronicity, flow, and the physics of light for the healing practitioner. And I start the title with the word synchronicity because my work as a physicist really focuses on the concept and the experience of synchronicity. And I'm passionate about synchronicity because in my experience, I've been studying consciousness for my own self for a long time, since I can remember, in high school and before that. I was always interested in what is it that's really who I am? What is it that I'm really here for? What is this space that we live in? What is space and time? And then when I got to be in my 20s and 30s, I started to have more experiences of synchronicity that I could point to and say, well, here's a point where space and time seem to be conspiring in a way to bring experiences that I just know in myself wouldn't have happened if there wasn't some meaningful force going on here, some meaningful guidance. And I've done some work to try and show that synchronicities happen greater than chance, and it's not just statistics. But I think all of us in this call have the experience of synchronicity, and we know in our hearts that there's a meaningful element to synchronicity. There's a way in which the universe is communicating with us and is responsive to us. So I'm researching the responsiveness of the cosmos. And I'm trying to understand that from a scientific point of view and put numbers to it and diagrams to it. And I'll show you a model that is an apple tree that I hope will stay with you in your heart and something you can take with you to apply to experiences of synchronicity. And then, but knowing about synchronicity is not enough, because how do we bring it into our lives to make use of it? One of the things that's beautiful about synchronicity is that it is incredibly empowering. If the world is responsive to us, we can certainly make mistakes and feel frustrated by our circumstances at times. But if the universe is responsive to us, we know that we are empowered. And even if we've somehow been part of the circumstances we've created that we don't like, we are important because the universe is responding to us. And so synchronicity really points to the importance of each of us. The role that we play in the cosmos is to create, is to light a spark. And if that's the case, then, oh my gosh, what an amazing, almost overwhelming responsibility, right? Because we can do that at any time. When we're asleep, when we're awake, when we're with our family, when we're at work, really any time there show up opportunities to work with synchronicity. And I'll try and provide some methods to bring those about more in your life in the course of these calls. But it's not possible to catch every opportunity. And I found that through difficult experience. And sometimes I miss an opportunity and I spend a couple days beating myself up about it. And, how do I get back into the flow? And that's what the flow is about. The flow is this place of experience where we're able to dance with life. We're able to dance with all the synchronicities. And the more that we acknowledge synchronicity in our lives, the more that we see it, the more we're going to miss it too sometimes. And so flow is a place of deep self-compassion that brings us through any self built up patterns of negativity or frustration, and brings us through that to a place of play. And when we're in flow, we are playing with life. And when we're playing with life and we're aware of synchronicity, that's just the magic storm of bringing together the responsive cosmos into who we are as individuals to play and create in our lives. So we're going to talk about all that, and the way that I get to that, the science of that, is through the physics of light, which I think is just phenomenal and really interesting. And I'm going to work on connecting that to all of you in the work that you do as healing practitioners for the people in your life. So there we go. I'm going to give you a brief overview, and I really welcome questions. I'm not going to moderate the chat board, but I'm going to allow Amelia to let me know if there's questions that come up that we can talk about. I'm open to that, and I see this as a dialogue. And I'm going to guide us through that dialogue by through the following topics. I'm going to talk about quantum mechanics a little bit and the idea of relational measurement. I'm going to talk about synchronicity, and talk about anticipated qualitative experience, describe exactly what that is and how that guides the process of synchronicity. I'm going to talk about the tree of possibilities, which is an image, a metaphor that I think you'll love. Meaningful history selection, which is the process of influencing that tree of possibilities to bring about certain circumstances that are meaningful. And Fourier space, which is the mathematical technology that's used to describe the tree of possibilities and meaningful history selection. And we're going to see pictures of the holographic sea of energy. And what I love about this work is that the metaphors that come very naturally to it are the most wonderful metaphors I can think of. And I didn't even really think of them. They just come through the work. The tree, the apple tree, is one of them. And the sea of energy is another one. And these are both very real things in quantum mechanics. And then to talk about flow, I'm going to introduce a process called the Lorax process, which I hope provides you a set of practical steps you can use to get into the flow when you find yourself in a mental space that's not in the flow. So I'm going to start with talking about synchronicity and the related concept of intention. And I'm going to start with a story of synchronicity to give you an idea of what I mean. So this statement on the screen, for those of you who are seeing the screen, is from the Unity Statement of Principles. And it says, "We affirm that our mental states are carried forward into manifestation and become our experience in daily living." Once again, we affirm that our mental states are carried forward into manifestation and become our experience in daily living. And I suspect that those of us on the call will align with this statement to different degrees and with maybe some different words here and there, but we feel that the cosmos is responsive, and our mental states, or maybe our emotional states or our affective states, have an impact on our experience. And that's more than just psychological. That's actually through experiencing different events in our life through synchronicity than would have happened otherwise. So let me tell you this story that happened a couple years ago. I was at a conference doing it was a work conference, and it was like a retreat. And so we were staying over at this retreat center, and in the after hours, most of the team had either gone to bed or was doing various things, and a couple of us decided to go use the hot tub. So we got all excited, and it was cold. This is the middle of winter. So we got all dressed up in our bathing suits and wrapped towels around us and trying to keep the cold out, but we know that we're going to be in the hot tub in a minute, right? So it's going to be nice and lovely, and we don't have to worry about shivering for just a couple minutes. So we walk out into the courtyard, and I'm heading across the courtyard to go to the hot tub area, which I haven't been to before. And someone comes back from the hot tub and says, "It's broken." And I'm standing there in the cold in the courtyard with a towel and a bathing suit, shivering and thinking, like, with all parts of my body resisting that fact, like, it can't be broken. I want to go use the hot tub right now. And so I don't know if you can relate to that experience. I imagine you can, of that transition when we learn information that's surprising. That moment when things happen that we weren't expecting, and we have to adapt. And we can't adapt. We can't like plan out our adaptation strategy, right? Because it's totally unexpected, that comment. And so in the moment, I'm standing there adapting to this fact of disappointment. And okay, well, what I'd really like to do is go back to my room and huddle up with a book and be quiet and not talk to anybody, because that would feel really calming. And if I can't go to the hot tub, I'll do that. So I'm about to turn around, and I hear this voice across the courtyard from somebody that's not part of our group. There was apparently another group on the campus there, and he says, looking right at me, I don't know why at me, I'd never met him before, and he said, "You should come meet our group. We're meeting in this room right over here, and we've got social time, and there's a lovely group of people, and you'd really love them." And I'm thinking to myself, this person doesn't know me at all. I don't know why that would come to me, but I know now to look underneath where the message is coming from, look past the messenger, and look at the message. And this was maybe a way in which the spiritual world was communicating and letting me know that there was something else here for me. I certainly didn't want to do that, because I wanted to get dressed and huddle up in bed and not talk to anybody anymore. But I was able to make a wise decision and pull myself together and change my clothes, and I followed his advice. And I went in there, and over the course of the night, had a number of interesting conversations with some lovely people. And this was a community of psychic energy healers, actually. And it's just a great group, and I really enjoyed meeting them, talked about my work and my upcoming book and various things. And then at the end of the night, someone had told me, "You got to meet this guy, Michael." And at the end of the night, somehow I made my way. He was the last person I talked to, and almost everyone else had gone to bed. And it turned out that Michael was kind of the patriarch of the group, and he invited me. He said, "I'd love to have you come speak to my community sometime." And so here I was suddenly seeing the connection. Like, not only did I have a lovely time, but here's an opportunity to further the work I'm doing. And I can preface this whole story by saying this was a period in my life where I was looking for more opportunities to share my work and to grow in my work. And so I knew that this might be one of those. And here suddenly it was turning into that. So we said goodbye, took each other's number. And then 2 months later, I get a call from my friend Janet. I'm just at home a couple months later, hanging out and continuing to work on my process. And I get this call from Janet. And turns out she wants to have me come in to speak at her community gathering, which is an association of professional consultants. And she talked with Michael, because she knows Michael. They're both on the board of this community. And once she realized that Michael knew me and he suggested that I come speak, she was like, Sky? It's a done deal. So it turns out these two people from my life that I didn't know knew each other conspired to bring me into their community because of a broken hot tub. So that's how synchronicity shows up in my life. And that's how the experiences that show up every day can serve for me as guideposts for what I might not know is waiting for me, gifts that I might not see right off the bat. So how does this work? The overview I'm going to give right now is the following. What I haven't written on here, I've got a diagram here for those of you who aren't looking at the computer that has 4 different connected boxes. And what's not written is the first thing, which is experience. We are all beings of experience. What we're having right now is an experience. And everything we've ever done has been an experience. And so I look at physics as something that emerges out of experience. Most physicists think of, you create the Big Bang, and from that you create space and time and matter and energy. And then somehow out of that emerges this complex thing that we call a human being. And they don't really explain how that happens. There's a lot of hand waving. And then that's the explanation of who we are. But that doesn't really align with what I know from my own spiritual exploration and my inner world. And what appears to me to be the case is that experience comes first. We are conscious beings of experience. And from that, we experience space and time. And we experience matter and energy. And the way we experience those things is through our mental, our affective, and our emotional states. So we have first an emotional reaction to our experiences, and that might translate into a feeling. an affect, and that might translate into some thoughts. And those are all related to each other. We'll talk more about that. And our mental, emotional, affective states serve as kind of an antenna in our body that call in an anticipated qualitative experience. So that's the second thing on the diagram. Anticipated qualitative experience. Anticipated because we can't help but draw ourselves toward or push ourselves away from the experiences we want or don't want to have. And so we're constantly like a radar for these experiences, and we're constantly feeling the world and having either a pull or a push towards the experiences in the world that we want to have or don't want to have. And that pull or push influences this tree of possibilities that I'll talk about through a process called meaningful history selection. And meaningful history selection is a process by which the most meaningful events in life, or that could occur in your life, become more likely to happen. They're not definitely going to happen, but they become more likely as a result of this process based on your anticipated qualitative experience. And so from meaningful history selection, we can see how synchronicities can show up out of that, because we're calling forth the more meaningful experiences into our life. And those are, by definition, synchronicities or meaningful coincidences. So meaningful history selection is a process that I'll talk about, and synchronicity is the experience that we have that comes out of that process. So I want to define synchronicity from Carl Jung's point of view. He said synchronicities are events that are meaningfully related, but not causally related. So in the case with Michael, there was certainly a meaningful connection between the desire that I had to further my work and make new connections and have more chances to speak. Ultimately, that's what happened. But there was no causal relationship, meaning that I didn't somehow know Michael ahead of time and influence the fact that I ended up meeting him. There was no connection there other than the meaningful outcome that was eventually going to happen. And so we'll see that from my point of view, the definition of synchronicity is a little more explicit. Synchronicity is an event which becomes more likely because it leads to a future experience we are seeking to have. Synchronicity is an event which becomes more likely because it leads to a future experience we are seeking to have. So I was seeking to have the experience of more opportunities to connect on my work and develop the work and see how it impacts people. And then I had the synchronicity of the hot tub being broken that night, which was a set of random configuration of particles in the world that broke a certain way that led me to meet a person who led me to meet another person that eventually turned in 2 months later to this experience I was seeking to have. So each of those middle things, the broken hot tub and the person that directed me here and there, were synchronicities. And they in themselves weren't necessarily meaningful, but they led to something down the line that was meaningful. So that's how I look at the concept of synchronicity. That's how it shows up most frequently in my life. And I want to say that no part of this is meant to limit the concept of synchronicity. And you all may have your own experience of what that's like for you, that you feel differently, it shows up differently in your body and in your heart and in your mind. And that is perfectly fine and legitimate. Just take what I'm saying as one approach to the process and see if it aligns up with what you know. So from quantum mechanics, we learn, and we'll talk more in detail in the future about what quantum mechanics tells us is what things are doing when we're not looking at them. So if chemistry is a study of chemicals and biology is a study of bio things, quantum mechanics is the study of what things are doing when we're not looking at them. What are things doing when we're not looking at them? Well, how can we know? By looking, I also mean smelling or hearing or, on the phone with somebody. Any kind of informational communication counts as what I'm calling looking. And when we're not looking at someone or something, we can't know what's happening. In fact, we can't know even that there's something definite happening. And what quantum mechanics tells us is that as soon as we stop observing something, it starts blossoming into many different possibilities. Branches of this unfolding tree. And if you stop to think about it, this unfolding tree is unimaginably complex because things are constantly, we're not observing most of the world, and this tree is just branching and branching and branching. So I'm just going to simplify it, and I've got on the screen here a tree with 2 branches at the bottom, and then from there's a few more branches branching out, and then up to the top there's little branches coming off of those, and it just gets more and more complex as you go up. And on the top of each of those branches, there's either an apple or there's no apple. And some of the apples are red. Most of the apples are red. There's a few green apples. And the basic idea behind meaningful history selection is that our anticipated experience, the experiences that we're seeking to have, interact with this tree of possibilities. And this tree of possibilities is timeless. It represents future states that are present right here. They're accessible right here. And so when I choose to go to that room where I end up meeting Michael, I choose not to go back to my hotel room and sit with a book, but I choose to go in and meet some new people. I'm populating the tree with apples that represent my desire to make new connections with my research. I'm proactively taking an action which tells the universe what it is that I'm after. And that shows up in the form of apples populated somewhere on the tree. And you can see, if you can see on this diagram, on the left, there's a branch that has a lot of red apples on the left. And when I decide to go out of my comfort zone and meet these new people and take a bold step into the unknown, I populate that branch with all these red apples. I tell the universe, this is where I want you to grow the apples. They have to do with the experience I want to have. And that branch becomes heavier because, as you know, when apples are on a branch, they become heavier. So that branch now becomes more likely to happen because of the probability of the weight of those apples. And so just like that, we've increased the likelihood of branches that align with the choices that we're making. That's really the central thing that I've learned from this process. Every choice I'm making is populating this tree with apples and influencing the weight on those branches in ways that bring me coincidences, bring me situations in which I can grow. And ultimately, that's what I use. I see synchronicity. The point of synchronicity is to grow. It's to lead us on a path towards wholeness. So it's not just to manifest specific things in our life, but to bring us on a path towards what makes us whole. Well, how do we get to that path of what makes us whole? Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talked about flow. He introduced the concept of flow to the popular audience in the early 90s, late 80s. And he wrote about it this way. Flow is lacking the sense of worry about losing control. So life would be so easy if I could just say, I want to be more successful. I'm going to take more control. I mean, I can do that. I can practice becoming more controlling. I don't know that I need the practice, but the other thing I can do is I could say, well, from now on, I'm just going to let go of control and let nature take its course, let spirit guide the situation. And that lets go of my own part in the process. And so it would be easy to take that pull as well and just always do the same thing. What I think flow is leading us towards is that sometimes one is needed and sometimes the other is needed. Sometimes a mix of the two is needed. And so when we actually get out of the dichotomy of being in control or not being in control, we can realize that what's really happening is we're just worried about how we're supposed to be. And when we can let go of that, we let go of the worry about losing control. And we do what children really know how to do and can teach us. My 9-year-old daughter teaches me how to play. And play is this natural state where we don't have control necessarily. Sometimes we have control and sometimes we don't. If we're playing tag, sometimes you're it and sometimes you're not it. And then it goes back and forth and you can't predict it. I went camping this past weekend with my daughter, and not camping too. We stayed in an Airbnb, but we went to a river and my wife. And we stayed in this beautiful river, and it was hot sun and cold water with rocks all around. And my daughter was in the water playing, and I was in the water with her, enjoying myself a lot. But after about an hour or two of that, I wanted to go lay on the rocks. and my daughter was still playing. And she was like, "Daddy, come play with me." And all she was doing was standing in the water and then jumping in the water and then standing in the water and then jumping in the water. And kind of like, there wasn't much to it. It was just this beautiful experience of experiencing the nature and the magic of the moment. And it reminded me of that place of play. And when I can get into playing even with the high intensity, high stakes aspects of my life, then it becomes fun, and there's a lacking the sense of worry about losing control. And that's what I think Mihai Csikszentmihalyi was pointing to when he talked about flow. So one of the things that I think is really important about flow is recognizing abundance. And abundance is sometimes a mixed thing. Sometimes the blessings we have that we experience are mixed. I can certainly say that my day is made of a mixed set of experiences. Sometimes the abundance I feel is talking to someone that I love who's having a hard time, and I get to experience closeness with them. And for me, that's a feeling of abundance because I get something special from it, even though the experience is one maybe of some grief. And so even amongst grief, we can feel the abundance of mixed blessings in our lives. You know, my sister had her first baby last year, and she's a very strong woman, and was given the challenge of having her hands not work for the first 9 months of having a newborn. Her hands were having, tendon issues, and she really couldn't pick up her baby or really do anything for herself. And it was extremely challenging for her. And what it brought for me was a chance to go see her once a week with my daughter. And so my daughter and I went to visit her every week on a regular basis and formed this deeper bond. And actually my wife and my daughter and I just moved to this area to be closer to my family. And then the situation shows up where I get to go be with my sister once a week and her new baby. And so now my daughter and her baby, the cousin, are really, really close. And so that is part of the abundance. And when we're in flow, I can go from being in flow at work and writing something really wonderful that I think is going to make a big difference to people, and transition out of that into making dinner with my family and experience the flow of that and the abundance of that. And then transition into maybe playing some music or dealing with bills or whatever it may be. In each of those activities, there's mixed blessings and abundance. And when we're in flow, we can feel that. We can see that. And so we again have this timeless tree of possibilities. So I'm going to talk about how the experiences show up in our lives from this timeless tree. And this idea of the Library of Heaven came to me out of a dream when I was researching this work. And I have a sense that you all will really love this metaphor. So I'm glad to share this with you. A physicist's idea of heaven, this is me speaking as a physicist, would be the totality of all possibilities. And that's what this timeless tree of quantum mechanics shows us. Every particle that interacts is generating a branching of that tree. Every time you interact with your family, it's generating many branches of that tree of how the different situations could evolve. And so this tree is out of this world. It's immensely, immensely, infinitely complex, representing every possibility. And to me, from the physics side of my brain, that's a great definition for heaven, the totality of all possibilities. But this is not an Amazon.com of heaven. This is a library of heaven. What I mean by that is we don't just sit there and click and do a search and find anything we want at any time and just have it show up and deliver it to our doorstep by, drone or whatever the technology may be. Rather, we're standing in a library, and off to our right, there are some books available. Those might be books on swimming at the river, and another on my left might be books on how to cook. In front of me, maybe books on parenting. But if I want to find books on how to repair my window, or books on how to understand biology, or books on how to become a software programmer or find a new career, I would have to move to a different part of the library. And so I'd have to find out where those parts of the library are, and I'd have to take very definite steps to move myself through the aisles in the bookshelves. And so that metaphor is about not every, even though the Library of Heaven has all these possibilities on the tree of possibilities for us, they're not all accessible to us from right where we stand. And we can connect with them in the future because we're timelessly connected to them. But that doesn't mean they're here. And by moving through the library, that's the same as taking steps in our lives, making choices in our lives that are in alignment with where we want to go. So if I make a choice to work on my research, that's going to populate the tree with apples that were related to success in my research and move me slightly closer to them and towards the aisle in the bookshelf in the library where those books are available. And but it's not going to move me closer to a bookshelf where I'm making the world a better place politically. That would be a different set of choices I might make by going to a rally or making some phone calls for a candidate or something like that. So the choices we make influence our path through the Library of Heaven. So on the screen now, I have a picture of a tree, and this is a branching tree that at every point breaks into 2 branches, and this is very geometrical. You don't have to think of the tree as this really sharp, mathy, scientist way of looking at it. I also have really pretty ones, but this one is showing us just a set of very simple steps. And I'm going to illustrate this process for you. So some of you may have learned that I play music a lot, and I play for the Center for Spiritual Living and the Unity Center, centers all around the country. And I first got involved with them because I was wanting to have a place to play music that was more compatible with my music and more supportive, and where people were actually listening and appreciating what I was singing about. So as a New Year's resolution, I made a decision to go visit the Center for Spiritual Living Santa Rosa and get to know them and try and get involved. So the first thing I did on the first Sunday was I went to the Center for Spiritual Living Santa Rosa, CSLSR. That was a bold action because I didn't know anybody there. The not bold action would have been to stay home and sleep in bed. But I took a bold action and I went out and I did that. So I'm moving along the left branch of this tree, and already from the beginning you can see that there are 5 apples on the left branch and 2 apples on the right. So if I hadn't have gone to the CSLSR that day, I would have been on the right-hand branch, and it would have been less likely for me to reach an apple. So already by going to the center that one morning, I put myself on the left-hand branch, and I've got 5 apples available to me out of 8 possible branches. So that's looking pretty good. And you can see some of the branches are dark purple. That's because it represents the weight of the apple above it. And if that branch mixes with another branch that doesn't have an apple, it's going to get less dark purple. It's going to become a lighter purple. So the color coding is trying to illustrate the weight of the branches there. Now here, just for those of you who can't see, I've got 8 branches, 4 on the right and 4 on the left. And on the 4 on the right, 3 of them have apples. And the other branch has fewer apples. So the right-hand branch is now heavier because my choice to go to the CSLSR is highlighting those branches and making that whole branch heavier. And I'm moving forward on the branches, and I end up going to the CSLSR again, which puts me on a branch here where I've now got 3 apples out of 4 possible branches. So if you're keeping track of the numbers, which I don't expect you are, we've gone from having like 8 apples out of 16 to 5 apples out of 8 to now 3 out of 4. 3 apples out of 4 branches. I've really increased my likelihood of getting to an apple. And this is the way that I explore the mathematics of this and can show that we're gradually increasing the likelihood of getting to whatever we've defined as the apples. And it's really crucial here that I'm making steps. I'm going to the CSLSR and I'm taking bold steps each week to get closer to my goal. And each time I went to the CSLSR, I would go up and meet the music director and talk with her and let her know what I was interested in doing and if there was some way I could support it. But at this point, I hadn't made any progress. So 3 weeks have gone by. I haven't had any success. I'm getting a little discouraged. And I wake up in the morning on the 4th week, and I think to myself, I don't want to go. It's just not going to turn into anything, and I've got so much else I want to do that I don't want to go. But there's a part of me that had realized that I was building momentum. And this momentum, I couldn't see it, right? Because I haven't gotten to an apple yet. But I've taken the steps I know I need to take. I've been going every Sunday to the Center for Spiritual Living. So I know in my heart, in my gut, that I'm building momentum. And so I decided that even though I can't see the outcome, I'm going to go again because I don't want to lose all that momentum I've built. I don't want to waste what I've already built up. I'm going to have faith. And this is where faith comes into the picture. Because as we take actions in our lives, we're building momentum on this tree towards apples. We're always doing that. Everything we do builds towards some apple. And so I find it really useful to remain aware and clear on what are the apples I'm going for. What do I care about right now in my life? Partly that's building the joy in my family from my daughter's school and my wife's business and our joy together. Partly that's building chances to come and talk with you all and share this work. Partly that's doing research. Partly that's playing music. Partly that's connecting with my family that lives in the area. And it's like a list of maybe 5 or 6 things that I keep coming back to say, how does what I'm choosing to do align with those core goals that I'm after? And so here, the core goal I was after was to play music with people that could really connect with it. And I decided to keep going on that path. And I went to the CSLSR again that day. And what do you know? I didn't have any success. So I was a little disappointed. But I maintained my composure. And on the way home, I got an email or a voicemail from somebody that I'd never heard of before. Her name was Reverend Mary. And she worked and was a minister at another Center for Spiritual Living. Now, please keep in mind, I didn't know anybody from the Center for Spiritual Living, and nobody knew me. So there was no way that she could have causally known that I was interested in joining that community. It's a totally different center. She got my number from someone who worked at the local music store and who knew me and knew that I was kind of interested in that type of music and the spiritual path and thought of me. And so miraculously, she got my number. And the minute she said what she wanted, I said, yes, I want to do that. So I was able to jump in and right away knew that that's the path I wanted to follow. And so that shows up as Reverend Mary calling me as a synchronicity, which leads to me saying yes and following through. And that's a process that I call retroactive event determination. So let's unpack that a little bit. Retroactive, well, Reverend Mary is her own person, and she's going through the world making her own choices. How did she end up calling me at just that moment? This ties into a very central concept in the physics here called relationality. There's a version of quantum mechanics called relational quantum mechanics. And what relational quantum mechanics says is that when we don't observe the world, it's evolving into all these different possibilities. It's a bunch of branches. When we do observe the world, it takes a definite state. We always observe the world in real definite form. It manifests in some definite form. But that form is only relative to us, the person doing the observing or the measuring. And that's the relational view of quantum mechanics. It's not the most popular view. A lot of folks think of quantum mechanics as telling us about what's actually happening in the world for everybody without this concept of relationality, that the world is defined for you and from your point of view. And so Reverend Mary calling me, well, how does she know to call me at just that right moment when I was ready for it or when I needed it? Well, she doesn't. She's also on a branching tree of possibilities. And the particular branch on which she calls it that particular day falls into place retroactively. In other words, I've never met her, so I haven't measured her at all. And I can't tell what she's doing. All I know is that retroactively, she ends up calling me, and I can look back at her timeline of what she chose to do and trace it back very logically to how she decided to call me at that particular moment. So I want to just pause here for a minute to highlight the mystery that's in this process. Here I am in the world, going through my life, making decisions as best I can about how I want my life and the world around me to unfold. And somehow other people are falling into place in just the right way to match the experiences I'm having. But I'm not controlling them. it's this magical way in which, or this mystical way in which nature has designed itself to weave us together, to bring us together at the right times for the benefit of the whole organism that we call life. The beauty I see in flow and synchronicity is that it's a way of being that brings us together for the better of everybody. Rather than clinging to one particular outcome, trying to go for one particular apple, when we let go of the particular apple and focus on, well, how do I get to an apple? We then don't have to come up against people. Like I didn't have to argue with the music director that I was trying to, get something from. She's not in my way because there's an apple that I wasn't even aware of from this other person, Reverend Mary. And so by being in flow, I can come into alignment with people and allow them to come into alignment with me in ways that benefit all the sides of the situation.
And Sky, let me ask you a question.
Please, yeah.
In terms of us as practitioners who hold space for individuals to give weight to their goals, when we partner with and help our clients, so we have this aspect of goal setting in our 10-step sequence where we co-create, work with our clients to define goals for what we're working on, what we'll be working with in that session. And I'm wondering if in that goal setting piece, we're increasing the weight of those branches by including, more focused direction or focused thought or focused energy around the reminder that there's something possible.
Absolutely. Let me feel into that.
Okay.
I want to honor that the folks on this call have done, I think, probably a lot of work to bring themselves fully into their practice. And that the energy that comes from setting an intention in that place, I think has a big impact on the clarity of that intention has a big impact on those apples, where they are, how heavy they are in a sense. There's an important piece about taking action. We all know that we have to add to our intention with empowered action, and that's where the empowerment comes in. But we don't have to in every case in just the same way. So sometimes intention brings about outcomes that we don't expect really directly. And sometimes it takes certain types of steps that we might need to take. But yes, I think that by setting goals, what we're doing is we are identifying in a conscious way what those apples are.
That's right.
Because we're always identifying apples, but we may not be conscious of which ones we're identifying.
That's right. And I'm also hearing the value as our clients come back to us week after week that we offer the reminder of whether they get there or not, we are also holding the reminder of what their deep desires are.
Yeah.
Like whatever that motivating force is that allowed you to go, oh, another week, I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And I think we serve.
I think that's very useful. And that's where the faith for me, that's how I see faith. It's the reminder that synchronicity is working even when I'm not aware of it. Mm-hmm. I'm moving along this invisible, timeless tree. And I'm going to do a guided meditation in just a moment that leads us through the process of identifying possibilities that we might have missed or we might have not noticed in the moment.
Lovely. We had one other question come in from a woman named Christine. She asks, could this retroactive event determination be something like morphogenetic resonance where like attracts like?
Yeah. Rupert Sheldrake is the person I know who did work on morphogenetic resonance. And I think that we're probably approaching the same concept from different directions. The word field in physics has a certain meaning, which sort of implies a physical thing. And so I think we'll talk a lot about this, that this tree exists in an information space. It's not a physical tree out there in the world, or it's not separate from us that we can get to it someday. It's in an information space, and the information space is ubiquitous and omnipresent. And when we take an action and have an anticipated qualitative experience, we are resonating with certain branches of that tree, which I think is related to the same concept of morphogenetic resonance.
Thank you. There's a couple more. Do you mind if I read them? And if you think they're too long, we can kind of adapt. So
that sounds good.
Great. Just let me know what feels right for you. Sky, great presentation. To clarify, asking the question, the momentum building implies a doing, but the flow and the synchronicity, this requires that we observe, observe, observe rather than doing. If we didn't observe, then that wave of possibility doesn't arise or emerge or collapse, correct? And how do you explain this tree of possibility with the law of karma?
Great. Those are great questions. Those are two different questions.
Yeah, and there's one more. Do you want the question?
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
All right. Isn't a lot of what you're saying, Sky, referring to the law of attraction? When you send out your desire of an event to happen, and you are aligned with that because you have risen your vibration to meet it, then Source, because of the law of attraction, creates events to align with your original desire.
Yeah.
So questions. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Yeah, let me answer those.
Okay, great.
So I love that first question, doing versus observing. And I'm going to talk a little bit more today, introduce this concept of the Lorax, L-O-R-R-A-X. And that is just what you're saying, which is start by listening, which there's a practice I'm going to give you in a moment to remind you of things that you might have not noticed. And the practice of listening can be looking, it can be listening, it can be smelling, or thinking about things you missed. It can be any form of engaging with the world. And from that, we gain information that we need to sometimes open our mind to. Sometimes opportunities show up, which are opportunities, but we might be sort of resisting them. I don't want to go to the movies. That movie doesn't sound fun. How many of you have ever been offered to go to a movie that you didn't think you were going to like, but you had to open your mind? And then maybe the next step is to reflect on, well, this person knows what I like, and they offered to bring me to that movie. So I'm going to reflect on that and realize maybe there's something there for me. And then release my expectations and then go to the movie, which is the action part. And then end up finding that I love it, maybe. So the doing and the observing are both part of that. And in our culture, we do a lot of doing. Here's my business plan, and now I'm going to go do it. I'm going to implement. And this is saying, if you add the first steps of listening and opening and reflecting and releasing, and then acting. We don't let go of the acting. We don't stop acting in the world. We just mix it equally with observing. And the opportunities, I think opportunities are showing up kind of like grass. Once you start to see opportunities, I become overwhelmed by how many different opportunities there are in a day for me to grow on my growth edge. As an example, I went to, like I was saying, to the river the other day, and we went out to dinner afterwards at this little town bistro. And I walk in, and there's a guitar player walking around the store playing music. And he goes into the restaurant part of the store and is doing a performance. But it's totally casual, and I just realized this is a chance for me to bring in my guitar. And I sat in and ended up playing a song with 3 or 4 songs with him. And so it's just like grass, here's this new opportunity to do this thing that's part of one of my core growth edges. So I think those are always happening, and we just miss them a lot of the time because we're not attuned to them. And that's where the observation part comes in. So shall I take on a couple of the other questions here? The tree versus karma. I think that's a great question. So the tree of possibilities and karma, I think, are really the same thing. I think that, the way I see the meaningful history selection part of this tree is that it is, it's nice, and this ties into the law of attraction piece as well. what's happening is very deep. I want to start there. It's coming from deep inside of us. And that's something that's very important to me to always come back to, is that this is not just a simple process of identifying what I want and then finding ways to do that. It's also about going deep inside and recognizing the work that this experience is teaching me about, the inner work. And I think that when we set out to do inner work in the world, we immediately start attracting to ourselves experiences. And in Seed of the Soul, Gary Zukov talks about this. We immediately start attracting experiences that allow us to break our old patterns and open to a new place of inner growth. And those experiences are attracted to us because of this process of meaningful history selection. And they may be negative experiences. They may be arguing with someone in the grocery store. But that's a necessary, that it's actually an opportunity for us to step into our power in a new way, or our compassion in a new way. And so when we're aware of our core growth edge, we can start seeing synchronicity show up to give us opportunities for that over and over and over. And they'll keep coming back until we are successful at that growth edge. And that's because in the apples we create will continue to be the same apples, because we're still having that growth edge, and we'll still be creating experiences that resonate with that growth edge. And the apples are, we don't want to be attached to a specific apple. The apple may show up as arguing with someone in the grocery store. It may come up with as a conversation with one of our parents that triggers us in a certain way. It could come up at work when we have an experience with someone, and it just triggers the same type of experience that's a growth edge for us. And that's the qualitative nature of those apples. And that's what I think karma is. It's about bringing us on paths that are necessary for our growth, for the growth of our spirit and our soul. And just to tie up the law of attraction piece, I absolutely agree with the alignment of the law of attraction with this. And my hope and my work is to continue to add or bring the physics world closer to the spiritual views that some of us have, and bring those two worlds together and provide some more foundational aspects of how physics can support the law of attraction, and how we can really, and from that we can also grow to understand the law of attraction really, how it works in our lives and in a grounded way. So would you like to do a guided meditation?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I want to lead you on an experience to find opportunities that already exist in your life. Opportunities are growing up like grass. Possibilities showing up in our lives every day. So I'd like to ask you to have a pencil and a paper handy, something you can write with and write on. And at any time, if you have some idea you want to write down, you can open your eyes and write it down. So settle in, relax, close your eyes, take a deep breath. You're standing in an open field. There are trees dotted here and there around you, and there is a soft breeze. You hear the rustle of the leaves in the breeze, and you feel the breeze gently running through your hair. There is a regal throne sitting in the middle of the field. The throne is draped with beautiful cloths of all colors, and there's ivy adorning the back of it. You walk over to the throne, and you see the word remembrance written in beautiful gold letters on its upright back. Remembrance. You smile and you sit yourself down on the soft seat. Noticing your breathing, you allow it to get easy. You're comfortable in the throne. You begin to notice your thoughts as they come. Then you let them go and you come back to stillness. Again, notice your thoughts as they come. Then let them go and come back to stillness. Following along with my voice, you're going to scan over your recent experiences to rediscover opportunities you may have forgotten or not noticed. With the next thought that comes naturally to you, allow your mind to scan over what happened to you this morning. Think about conversations you might have had. Who did you see? Where did you go? What happened this morning? There may be events that happened that you forgot about. They're just now coming back to you. Did somebody mention something they need help with? Did any unexpected ideas come up? If there are any of these you would like to remember, use the pencil to write them down. When you're ready, you can allow your mind to go back even further in time to last night. Again, think of the places you went, the people you saw, conversations you had. Are there any moments you had forgotten that you want to follow up on? Any ideas that came up that you want to capture? Any people you came across that need your help? What happened to you last night? And if you'd like, you're welcome to think further back in the day to yesterday in the morning. You can go back earlier in the week. Any special moments that happened that you want to follow up on? Any ideas that came to you that you've forgotten about? Anybody you met who had an interesting idea or needed some help? If you have any ideas you want to write down, feel free to write them down in your paper. Maybe you can identify opportunities for you to reconnect with those moments, to do something useful or interesting, to light a spark. As any forgotten moments arise, reflect on whether they can serve as opportunities for you or as opportunities to serve others. You're still sitting on the throne of remembrance. You feel its support under you. Now you look around at the open field. The breeze through the field whispers to you that you are the source of the meaningful synchronicities that appear in your life. You are the source. Any remembered opportunities you wrote down are opportunities to light a spark that can impact other people. You are important beyond measure. These sparks only get lit if you light them. You smile with anticipation and gently lift yourself out of the throne of remembrance. You make your way to the edge of the field, giving thanks with every step for the opportunity to create. Now gently bring yourself back into this room, this phone call, and take a moment to look at your paper and note anything you wrote down. If you found any latent opportunities waiting for you, think about how you might take the next step. You might go back to somebody that you spoke with and met with and say, I want to talk more about that. This is going to tie into that Lorax process I talked about. This is really the listening step. This is how we pay attention to our own lives and the things that have already happened when we're just too busy to notice everything all the time, and reconnect with some of that and dig up some of those nuggets of synchronicity gold that we can light a spark to and turn into, possibly turn into something. Are there any comments that you'd like to bring up, Amelia?
I can just share a personal reflection in that, you know, I feel like I look at things, I feel like I notice things, but sitting in that golden throne of remembrance, I was really moved deeply by how many opportunities came up that I had just touched in on and then let go.
Wonderful.
And I wrote down about 8, and I think 7 of them start with the words, thank so-and-so. Be grateful. And, you know, that sense of gratefulness. Because I'm going to let that sit in here a little bit and just encode that mindfulness around returning my gratitude for interactions and moments and people. So really appreciate it. And
that's wonderful. And that is such a part of, I think, being in flow and experiencing synchronicity. We are sitting in this mixed abundance of mixed blessings. And by starting to notice all the opportunities we have to thank others for kind things they've done or ways that they've helped us. I mean, that is such an amazing first step, whether we're looking for just closer connection in our life or looking for more professional opportunities or closer family connections, you know, opportunities to be grateful for what people have contributed to our lives are a wonderful step into synchronicity and flow. Thank you. So we have not a whole lot longer, and I want to just introduce a few of the remaining concepts that we'll talk about in the classes. how can we access these future possibilities? Right there in the future. But they exist on this timeless tree. Fourier space is a timeless and spaceless representation of ourselves. And I had this dream on the night when this insight back in 2007, when it first really started to come. I had this momentary vision of light. Instead of moving past me at the speed of light, the light was frozen and moving really slowly like a glacier. And I wrote for about 3 hours, and then I went to sleep and had this dream. And in the dream, a spirit voice, a guide, said, "You don't seem separate to me, and I don't seem unified to you. You don't seem separate to me, and I don't seem unified to you." And it opened me up to this possibility that we live in what we call space-time, which is space and time, but there's this other thing that we could call Fourier space, for reasons I'll tell you later, named after Joseph Fourier, and it is parallel to space and time, what we call the conjugate space of space and time. But in that space, there is no space and time. That's specifically what doesn't exist in Fourier space. So trying to embody that, what is that? How could we possibly imagine spacelessness and timelessness? Well, this being was saying that you don't seem separate to me. I'm looking around me and I see a lamp and I see my chair and I see people out the window and I see a computer in front of me, and everything seems separate. And yet there's this representation of the world that we call Fourier space, that in which those things are not separate. And I think a lot of folks on this call will understand and identify with the statement that that space is energy space. It's a space in which the frequencies of, it's a frequency space. And we call it, in physics, we call it momentum energy space. And so what we're talking about is the realm in which we can write anything in terms of waves. And this is what quantum mechanics has told us. We can write anything in terms of waves. And that's what Joseph Fourier did. And it's so interesting to me because I sit here and so much of the difficulty in life comes from feeling separate from the things I'm dealing with. You know, I feel separate from my computer, and when it breaks, I have to deal with it, and I don't control it. And yet there's this spirit realm that is saying, you don't seem separate to me. You seem as part of one whole unified space, which is what we call Fourier space. And we'll talk in a lot more detail about Fourier space, but Joseph Fourier developed a technique to turn any shape into waves. And on the screen here, we have a square wave, which is like up, over, down, over, up, over, down, over, and moving all the way to the right. And he was able to say that you can break that up into basic vibrations. And the vibrations are simple sine waves that you would see like on the ocean. And depending on how you combine all of those different waves of different frequencies, you can get any shape you want. You can't combine them haphazardly. You have to actually choose carefully, and you get any shape. It turns out that when we take a picture, a lens performs a Fourier transform. So this is how we get the thing that's called a hologram. Now, a photograph is a picture of something that relates one-to-one. And this is the really key point I want to get across here. A photograph relates one-to-one with the thing that you're taking the photograph of. So a photograph might have a picture of trees if it took a photograph of some trees. And you could point to any point on that photograph and compare it to a point on the tree and say that they look alike. So in that sense, we would say that there's pixels on the photograph that correspond to a colored pixel on real life. But that only happens when you take a lens and put it in between the tree and your photographic plate. So on the back of my phone, there's a little hole there with glass that's a circle, and it's got a lens in it. And you all know what a lens looks like. It's kind of thick in the middle and thin on the edges, and it's circular. And what that lens does, magically, it seems, is perform a Fourier transform. It takes the incoming light, and this is the really key amazing part. It takes the incoming light and it bends it together so it mixes. In fact, it mixes so well that it completely intermixes. And in doing so, it's like it unlocks the photograph that was present in the original light but couldn't be seen. It unlocks it into a map that shows up on the photograph. So that's how photography works. A lens takes the Fourier transform of the light. Holograms have an even deeper feature, which is that they contain three-dimensional information. If I look at a hologram and it's a picture of trees, I can move to the right and I can look behind the trees that are in the front. I can see it as a three-dimensional image because the information is actually encoded into that flat hologram. The hologram is still flat, but the information's there. What's so beautiful about that is that the sensitive photographic plate is capturing light as it really is. Light as it really is holographic. It doesn't have a specific image. It has all the images that could be viewed of the scene you're looking at. So it's not until we place a lens in the path of the light that we get a particular perspective on that forest that we're taking a picture of. And that's like what we're doing in our lives. We're interacting with this tree of all these possibilities that in itself is not finite. It's not focused. There's not one set of circumstances that's true until we place our lens of ourselves and our observation into that, and we get a specific outcome. That specific outcome is related to our perspective on the scene. But all the information about all the possibilities was present in the light before we put the lens there. And so holograms are a beautiful representation, both metaphorically and actually representing the physics of this, of how all the possibilities are present in every drop of light. The entire scene of the trees is present in every particle of light. And then when you combine them all together, they reaffirm each other in order to, they conspire to create a whole image. And when we take a lens, our lens of our observation, we condense just one possibility out of that, one perspective out of it. And I'll just show you briefly on the screen here what that looks like. If you take a square box here on the left, and you can represent it by waves, which are shown on the right. And this is actually a graph on the right, is a graph of waves in frequency space. These are different frequencies that we present in different amounts to create this shape of a box on the left. So I have a cube on the left, and I have a wavy shape in frequency space. The places where that wave is high means we've got a lot of frequencies at that frequency. And in places where that wave is low, we have very few frequencies at that frequency. And so you can create any shape through this process. And the Fourier transform shows up in all sorts of applications, from audio and video analysis to medical imaging and MRI. We'll talk more about that, and it's very fun and interesting. And we can actually talk about timelessness through various aspects of, looking at sound and understanding any sound can be broken up into frequencies. I think, Amelia, we're getting close to the end, and I want to jump to the Lorax process, make sure I share that briefly with folks, and then I suppose you would like to maybe have some questions and dialogue.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. So I didn't talk about some ideas around the experience too much, but we are experiences who are generating, having emotions, feelings, and thoughts, which then create experiences through the process of synchronicity. And I want to show you how that happens through the Lorax, or how we can make more use of that through the Lorax process. So how do we get into flow when we're out of flow? Well, we went through one step of that process, which was listening. And that was the meditation we did, where we looked at experiences we've had and listened to what occurred and made note of it. And often that involves opening our minds. And so the next step would be, I might write down something that somebody said, which I immediately closed my mind to, but now I look back on it and I can be a little more open-minded and say, well, going to that movie might be interesting to me. I do trust that person's opinion, and maybe I want to be open-minded about that movie. And then I'm going to reflect on the situation. Once I've cleared away the no's, I'm going to reflect on, well, how is this maybe beneficial to me? And this is where I come back to those core goals that I might be, keeping in my heart all the time? How does this reflect on my ability to have a stronger family dynamic? Or how does this reflect on my ability to have more opportunities to play music and or my spiritual growth? And then once I've reflected, I might have a sense of how I might want to move forward. And I might need to release my attachment to what I was going to do. Maybe there's something I really wanted to do, but that was actually less aligned with the flow and my core goals. Maybe I wanted to stay home and watch TV. And actually, it's more aligned to go out to a movie with this friend and see something I hadn't expected to see. So I'm releasing the attachment that I might have had and then choosing to act, making a decision. And the decision is ours, right? We only can know if a synchronicity is there to teach us something or what is there to teach us, because we know inside ourselves whether there's alignment or not. And then lastly, this cycle can be repeated, and it can take 30 seconds, or it could take 5 minutes, or it's taken me as long as a year to follow this process and realize at the end that Spirit was guiding me to listen to something a year ago, and I finally got the message. So this process just can be repeated over and over, however you see it unfolding in your life. So I will talk about ways to enhance flow, such as feeling gratitude that Amelia was talking about, and ways to inhibit flow, such as the hidden feelings that we all carry that are influencing the types of apples that are populating on the tree, hidden feelings we might not have been aware are there. And we can live our life well with what brings us joy, with what challenges us, with what enlivens us, and bring solutions into the world that are desperately needed through synchronicity and flow, coming from our authentic selves. So I thank you so much for listening to my presentation and my ideas and where this is all going in physics. And I'd love to stay on the line and have a dialogue with folks about whatever comes next. And I've got a book coming out that I've got on the screen here called Living in Flow, The Science of Synchronicity and How Your Choices Shape Your World. And it's available for purchase now online at skynelson.com/livinginflow. But it's not coming out until March 5th of next year.
Thank you, Sky.
Thank you.
And for those who are also interested in meeting Sky live and in person, he's one of our keynote speakers for the Worldwide Conference coming up in February. So we'll be able to get our well, I guess we can't get our pre-order book autographed, but we could get a sheet autographed and then put it in the book. Get it. Yeah, I'll do that. So we've got a couple more minutes. And I just encourage folks to, if you've got questions that are coming up, ask them in the chat or the Q&A. And while people are typing in, I had something that came up as you were talking about the Lorex process, and I want to just sort of offer it. One of the things that I was noticing when I was listening to you, a little thought came up that said, Amelia, I think what he's saying is you need to get out in the world and create connections, because it doesn't seem like being in flow is an individual process altogether.
Right.
That there's something emerging underneath your work that's drawing us into that community-centered space, that oneness space, that wholeness space that requires us to take those moments to connect with each other.
Yeah, I feel that flow is a collaborative effort. Flow is not about a single object. It's about all of us flowing together. It's necessary to have the different elements in order to find flow, in order to have flow. And synchronicities are events that show up that influence, where somebody shows up into my life and it influences me, but I'm also influencing them. And so synchronicity, it really is about interaction and connection.
That's right. Thank you. I'm going to personally remember that on the nights that I want to stay home.
Well, I think it's about finding wholeness, and I have the same. I've come to the recent realization that I'm a high functioning introvert. I've always thought of myself as an extrovert, and it's really about wholeness. And sometimes it's taking space to grow quietly, and sometimes it's tackling something external. but it's about that balance between the inner and the outer, and it is about being seen in the world.
It's lovely work, Sky. And we do have a couple questions coming in. One's from Veronica. How do I know something is coming to me as remembrance/instinct and not actual mind thinking?
Let me feel into that for a second. Well, I do feel that the mind has an important role to play. And it's helpful to me. I keep coming back to my core goals, I guess you could call them. You know, right now in my life, my core process is around learning to be more visible and be more exposed and not hide myself. And that shows up in my teaching, like here. It shows up in my music and performing on stage. It also shows up in my relationship with my wife and my daughter. And I find that most opportunities that show up in my life are in alignment with that. And I've come to the point of even like not even doubting the circumstance anymore and trying just to go with this. I've identified a part of myself that's underneath that doubting, that just knows that this is another chance. Like I was at school yesterday and had a card that the school had given us to give to a friend who was in need. And at the morning meeting, I just took the moment to stand up and say, thank the school in front of the whole school, to thank the school, my daughter's school. You know, it's a bunch of K through 4 students, young students, and thank them for what they'd done with this card. And there was a place of doubt in me that wasn't sure I should do that. Is this the appropriate time or the right place? But there's a place that I've come to authentically know that that's just my path. My path is to show up when that urge happens, is just to show up and do it, and not to question or doubt it as whether it's valid or the worthwhile step or appropriate. And that's true for me, and it's going to be, I would imagine, different for other people. But it is in tuning into that core, what is the core flow for me in my life?
Thank you, Sky. Sky, if you don't mind, we've got about 2 minutes left, and I could take a stab at this, but you and I speak a little bit different languages in some cases, in some spaces. But I was wondering if you could give us just a preview of what's coming in your deep dive.
Your Wi-Fi broke up there, but do you want to
hear a little bit more about what's coming in your deep dive?
Oh yeah. So we're going to have time to go into more detail about experience being the foundation, and then from that comes emotions and feelings and thoughts, and essentially how feelings are driving this process of synchronicity. We're going to look at more examples of the process of how synchronicity shows up. We're going to look at a lot more detail of the Fourier space and how timelessness shows up in the world, how we can imagine timelessness and spacelessness, and some of the really cool ideas that I think show up there from a physics perspective. And we'll talk about flow and how to make sense of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work. And so we'll go in a lot more detail into a lot of the different pieces that we saw today in the 3 different sessions. In the first session, I think we're talking about meaningful history selection in a lot more depth and retroactive event determination. In the second session, we'll talk about light and timelessness and spacelessness and the physics and the math there. And in the last session, we'll talk a lot about flow and tie it all together.
Thank you so much, Sky. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening. And I hope to see you in the deep dive with Sky. Starts in about 2 weeks. And I'll be sending out the recording of this evening's call probably tomorrow. All right.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to be here.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks,
Bye, everybody.
Sky.